Alien Nation, a short-lived and largely forgotten franchise from the late 1980s, and a favorite of mine despite its many flaws. It began with the 1988 film starring James Caan and Mandy Patinkin as detectives Sykes and Francisco, and the following year was repackaged into a TV series with Gary Graham and Eric Pierpoint in the lead roles. It was a cop show. It was an exploration of the immigrant experience in America. It was science fiction. It kinda confused people. Cancelled at the end of its first season despite a strong cult following, the show limped on through the 90s with 5 TV movies, the last one in 1997. The story begins with a big flying saucer full of 250,000 slaves crashing in the Mojave. They're put in quarantine, studied, a few siphoned off into shady government projects, but most of them are eventually naturalized and released into the population. It's a little fuzzy on exactly what their legal status is. There's an ongoing plot line about a ballot measure to let these newcomers vote, which suggests they're not US citizens. But if they're resident aliens, why a special amendment for them? It's one of many ways that the show's lore is kind of a mess. But the film and the pilot episode especially set up some puzzles. In the film, we're told that these newcomers are engineered laborers, controlled with a highly addictive drug.
We were genetically engineered as slave laborers. It was our only means of pleasure. Allowed. The harder you worked, the more you got. The more you got, the harder you worked.
The plot of the film revolves around the manufacture of this drug and the organized crime ring behind it. It's a straight-up cop story. The TV pilot takes a more imaginative tack with it, one that poses some very interesting questions at the start of the series.
One of the most curious aspects of newcomers' slavery was their apparent submissiveness.
Yes, we were. Completely submissive.
Why?
We just were. Since then, I've often wondered myself. I can't imagine being that way now.
None of them could remember anyone to revolt against. Is that right?
Yes.
So who ran the ship? Who were you slaves for?
We never saw anyone but ourselves.
This idea of obedient, almost self-supervising laborers implies something fundamentally different from either the American institution of plantation slavery or the slavery of the Roman and Ottoman empires. In this instance, it's established that there is a gas in the ship's atmosphere that makes them obedient, negating the need for any direct supervision or coercion. They're robots, both in the original meaning of the word laborer and the more recent sense of automaton. They're biologic automation, unable to become truly autonomous conscious beings. This adds an immense new dimension to their introduction into a free society. It's like a machine becoming conscious. There's a lot of story potential in this, but unfortunately, as the series went on, the concept devolved into impoverished slaves living in hobo camps in the halls of starships while strutting thugs brutalized them for no productive reason. There was even a terroristic resistance movement retconned in during the final installment. Even the gradually demystified Clesantsons support this initial biotech slavery idea, translated as overseer, not master, owner, or some similar word implying complete authority. The overseers are presented as mysterious and distant, at least early on. Later they're revealed as the same species, distinguished only by a tattoo on their wrist. To me, this implies property status of a different sort, rather than being the top tier of a hierarchy. But there's no real evidence for that, and the show went in a different direction as it evolved. But there's something fascinating about this idea of an entire labor caste made compliant through chemical influence, compliant enough to operate the ship, to work mines.
The controllers regulated it. We would receive small amounts as a reward for our labor in the mines.
And an overseer class to give the instructions and maintain the behavioral control systems, as though they're within a culture that developed interstellar travel but lacks computers or automation. There are glimmers of doom here, but the show didn't do anything with that. There's also another curious detail about their biology. In order for a female to become pregnant, she requires 2 males, the fertilizing partner and a binom, a non-fertile male that performs a catalyzing function somehow.
A newcomer woman really needs 2 men to,
fertilize for egg, yes. The genom, like myself, who provides the sperm, and the binom, less than 1% of our male population, who prepares the channel with the catalyzing emission.
Additionally, there is a stage in the pregnancy when the partially developed fetus, encased in a protective pod, is expelled from the female and must finish its gestation inside the incubation pouch of the fertilizing male, which was played up mostly for comic relief at the time. All of this seems highly unlikely as a naturally evolved mechanism. It's too easy for an entire population to die out. But it makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of an engineered slave labor force. Not only are mating pairs in the total population easily controlled, but there's a clear point when the offspring can be inspected and then either transferred to the male for final gestation or rejected. It hints at an entire species either modified or deliberately created to be strong enough for hard physical labor, intelligent enough for complex technical work, chemically controllable for docility without impairing either their strength or intelligence, and with a built-in failsafe to prevent unauthorized matings both to enhance desired traits and control total numbers. Setting aside for a moment all the questions and possibilities this poses about the civilization they exist within, there are huge story possibilities ignored by the show. Not only are these beings, bred as slaves and mentally controlled, becoming complete individuals within the context of a rather chaotic society.
You invite us to live among you in an atmosphere of equality that we've never known before. You give us ownership of our own lives for the first time, and you ask no more of us than you do of yourselves. I hope you understand how special your world is.
But there's the question of survival. The series often played with the threat of these newcomers from an invasive species angle.
We will face the end of our race, our planet, in our lifetime.
And the danger to their own survival through the targeted killing of binomes.
It's the purists.
You can't assume that.
All this talk about the census, about controlling our population. I read today that some of them want to sterilize us. If they kill the binome, George, it's what our people have always feared.
But the series ignores the question of whether they could procreate naturally. Are binomes a rare but naturally occurring gender, which seems unlikely given the bottleneck it places on reproductive potential of a population? Or are they something that requires intervention to produce? Some humans worried about losing their world to a stronger, smarter, invasive species, while those same newcomers face a children of men-style infertility crisis has huge potential. Do the newcomers try to engineer their own binome class? What does that entail? Is it something that can be compensated for technologically, or do they have to be bred? What cultural factors and taboos are at work? And every effort they make to allow their species to reproduce can be perceived as a danger to humanity from a competing species, while any effort to stop them from maintaining their fertility is effectively slow-motion genocide. The show would still get to have purists as bad guys, but they're given a motive that isn't without merit if newcomers reproduce quickly without external controls. There are several great episodes of a series that can be pulled from that. And of course the show's romance subplot between Detective Matt Sykes and his neighbor Kathy. It played with questions of cultural differences, coming to terms with each other's perspectives, and learning to love each other despite and sometimes because of those differences. It's one of many ways the show worked with themes of immigration and cultural exchange, but it always pulled back from an obvious question, because this couple is a microcosm of the question at the heart of this show. Can two distinct species occupying the same ecologic niche live together long term? Can they exist as equal partners within a broader collective culture? Is it possible for them to birth something new, both in the biologic sense of a mixed species couple having a child with any level of technological assistance, and the civilizational sense? Are the newcomers more like an ethnicity, the same underneath their different appearance and customs, or are they really just an invasive species that can pull humans out of the gene pool without diluting their own? Or another route, the newcomers could be human-based, engineered from human stock picked up sometime in the past and modified to be more robust as laborers. There's a lot of interesting stories swirling around that, though it would be easy to do it badly. In any case, Alien Nation started off with a lot of potential. The film told a story of culture clash and assimilation blended with a solid buddy cop story, and the series pilot laid the groundwork for several potentially great story threads, despite the Scooby-Doo plot of the episode complete with a rubber monster suit. Which, to be fair, was sort of set up in the film.
He's dead.
No, he's not. Not if he overdosed on the drug. Massive amounts trigger a change. Your body function seize up. You appear to be dead, but it is really a state of incubation. When you emerge, you are metamorphosized. What would happen if humans see what we are capable of becoming?
But despite a few great episodes, for example Red Room about a government program using MK-Ultra techniques to turn newcomers into assassins while they were still in quarantine, or The Game with Andres Katsoulis running a high-stakes game of Tenkanese roulette with a saltwater cannon, the series mostly falls short of its potential. I do have to wonder if it would have achieved Babylon 5 or Battlestar Galactica levels of acclaim if it had come along a few years later. And of course, any kind of engineered slave labor cast makes me think of Homo Servus from the later Draca stories, which we'll get to.